Okay, so welcome back. Welcome back to the class. On the last class, we were summarizing all the time tenses. We were checking all the time tenses there are, and I hope it was clarifying for you. But I told you that wasn't the end. We still need to continue. We're gonna be checking the passive voice, but before that, we need to check modal verbs. Modal verbs is a topic that is kind of long, kind of big. It is not that similar to what we do in Spanish. So sometimes it is a little bit more complicated for us to understand them because they don't really have a translation in Spanish. In Spanish, we solve these problems in a different way. Okay, so you may remember some modal verbs. Maybe you remember the modal verb can or could, something like that. It's possible, right? So, do you know how to use them? Do you remember how to use all of them? Let's check. The modal verbs that we can remember. Can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, ought to, must, and would rather. Would rather. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and that's it. This is the, let me just erase this because it is not really that legible. So let me just write it again. Would rather. Okay, so these are all the modal verbs there are. That is the good news. The good news is that there aren't that many. There are only 11. Okay, and they are not that difficult to remember, I hope. And some of them are kind of old and not many people use them anymore. So we're gonna be checking that too. For example, we have a couple of things that we can say. We can say that, for example, this verb, ought to, I'm sorry, ought to is a very old verb. I mean, not many people use it anymore. Most people use must or should. They normally never say ought to. And even when they say ought to, you're probably gonna find it written like this. Ought to, oughta, something like that. This is like a very, very informal way to write it. The normal way will be ought to, but this is a very old, kind of old modal verb. You're not gonna be finding it too much except like in very, very specific texts, or maybe with old people in England or something like that. The other one is shall. Shall is another one that is, well, it exists, and some people use it sometimes, but it's not really that common. People are using other modal verbs. So these two are pretty much out of fashion, and they are not just as common as they used to be. So we're going to be talking about that. So what do we have? It says modal verbs are very similar to auxiliaries. Okay, so this is very, very important. Let's go back to the drawing board, and you remember that we have subject, auxiliary, or auxiliary, verb, and complement. This is how we make affirmative statements. The thing is, when we have a modal verb, the thing is that we use the modal verb instead of the auxiliary. We don't have an auxiliary, so we have a modal verb. So they are like interchangeable. You can use an auxiliary. You remember the auxiliaries for the 12 time tenses? We had will, did, does, do, have been, the verb to be. All of those are auxiliaries. We can stop using them and instead use modal verbs. Okay, we can use a modal verb. So if you want to make a sentence, you can say something like subject. Instead of the auxiliary, you use, for example, can, which is a modal verb, and then the verb. And it can be, I can jump very high. I can jump very high. So in that regard, you have your subject. Sorry. I need to pick the other tool. Yeah. you have your subject, you have your modal verb. It's not really an auxiliary, it's your modal verb, in this case can. You have your verb, in this case the verb to jump is the one that we are using. And then you have your complement, which is whatever extra thing that we have, very high. I can jump very high. Okay, so they are very similar to auxiliaries. Now, what do they have? What are the rules for modal verbs? And how do we use them? What do we need them for? Well, modal verbs, they are telling you, remember something that is very, very important. Remember that normally the point of the auxiliary exists to tell us the time. When you have an auxiliary, then you have the time, okay? The problem is that when you don't have the auxiliary, you have a modal verb. And what is the point of the modal verb? The modal verb is telling you the mode or the way. The modal verb is telling you something about this verb. It's telling you something about the verb. It's telling you if the verb is possible, if the verb is necessary, if the verb is conditioned, if the verb is preferable, if the verb is a deduction. So we have many different ways to use modal verbs, and they mean different things. In this case, for example, the modal verb can expresses ability or capacity. So you're saying, I can jump, it means jumping is possible to me. I can jump, I have the ability to jump, I have the permission to jump, I have I don't know, depending on the modal verb. This modal verb, the modal verb can, is talking about ability or capacity. So in this case, you're saying that this verb is possible for you. I can jump very high. Okay, so this is pretty much how modal verbs work. Now, what is the problem with modal verbs? Well, they have many problems. The first rule that we need to remember to understand about modal verbs, let me just erase this and this and that. The problem with modal verbs, something important that we have to remember, is that number one, they are never conjugated. So they are always can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, ought to, must, or would rather. So they never change. It doesn't matter if the person is he, you never say he cans. No, never. He can, she can. It is always just the way they are. You never conjugate a modal verb, yes? Whenever you want to say must, they must, and that's it. Never musted, no, that's impossible. Musting, no, that's impossible. Musts, no, that's impossible. You never conjugate modal verbs. Modal verbs are the way they are, and you cannot change that. You can never, ever change that, okay? So what is the other problem? Well, this is one characteristic of modal verbs. You never change them. It doesn't matter who the subject is. They always remain the way they are. Can, do, do, no. Can, must, will, would. They always remain the way they are. The other important thing is when you are using a modal verb, this verb here, the verb, is always on the base form. So this is super easy. You never have to conjugate verbs. When you say I can, then you say be, the verb to be. You never say I can am. Yeah. You never say she can is. I can be. You can say you can be. It is always in the base form. Yeah, you never change that. Whatever the verb you have, it doesn't matter which verb you have. If you say, for example, they must, you have your subject, you have your modal verb. This verb is always in the base form, so you never conjugate them. They must go. Not going, not went, not gone, anything like that. They always are in the base form. Jump in the base form. Be in the base form. Okay, so you never conjugate them. What is the other problem with modal verbs? Well, it is not really a problem, but as you may remember, sorry, I shouldn't have erase that. As you may remember, when you have an auxiliary, the point of the auxiliary is that it tells you the time. When you have a modal verb, it's telling you the mode. And another important thing about the auxiliary is that when you have an auxiliary, the auxiliary takes the negative. If you want to make a negative statement, the auxiliary takes the negative. So you say something like, I don't, the auxiliary is taking the negative, like pizza. I don't like pizza. The auxiliary is taking the negative. What happens when you have a modal verb? The modal verb takes the negative. I can't jump very high. Okay, I cannot jump very high. It's impossible for me to jump very high. Whatever the modal verb you have, you say, I could drive. If you want to make it negative, I couldn't drive. The modal verb takes the negative. That's the only way that we can do it. What happens when you make a question? Normally, your auxiliary switches positions with the subject. You have first auxiliary and then subject. You say something like, did you see the car? We have auxiliary first and subject next. When you have a modal verb instead of an auxiliary, you need to do the same thing. The modal verb is the one that is going to be switching positions with the subject. So you say, can you tell me? Yeah, it is pretty much the same thing. You have first the modal verb and then the subject. So the problem is, whenever you have a modal verb, the modal verb is going to act as if it was an auxiliary. It's going to take the negative, like an auxiliary would, and it's also going to switch positions with the subject to make questions, like an auxiliary would. So when you are, there's a big problem. The big problem is that we have 4 things that we need. We have 4 spaces. We have subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. Yeah, auxiliary, subject, verb, and complement. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. We have 4 spaces. So when we are using a modal verb, the modal verb is taking the place of the auxiliary. So we can never, ever mix them. You can never mix auxiliaries with modal verbs. You never say, I don't, can, go. This is impossible because this is an auxiliary and this is a modal verb. And we don't have space for an auxiliary and a modal verb. You have your subject, you have your verb, and you need to decide if you want to use the simple present, then you use an auxiliary. If you want to use a modal verb, then you can never use the auxiliary. I can go, negative, I can't go. Okay, so we never, ever combine modal verbs and auxiliaries. When we are using modal verbs, we are not using auxiliaries. So what is the problem with that? Well, the problem is that you may remember what is the purpose of auxiliaries. Auxiliaries exist to give you the time. If you have an auxiliary, the auxiliary is going to tell you if the sentence is in the simple present, in the simple past, in the future continuous, or whatever. So when you say I can, I can go, this sentence is technically not in present because the auxiliary for present is do or does, and we cannot use the auxiliary when we have a modal verb. So you never combine them, and this sentence is technically not in present. But the thing is, normally, most of these verbs, they mean something. I mean, can mean ability or possibility, but can also means present. I mean, when you say I can go, it means when can you go? Well, now, or normally, or always. When you use can is always in present. I can go when? I can go. When? Now. Yeah, when you say I can go, it means present. The problem is, how do we say can? How do we express ability or capacity in the past or in the future? How can I say I did can? No, because this is an auxiliary and this is a modal verb. You never conjugate them. Well, I can say I can't. No, this can never change. So it is impossible to say can in the past or in the future. In the future, what do you say? I will can. I will can go. No, you have two modal verbs and you cannot have two modal verbs. If you want to use the future, I will go. If you want to use the modal verb, I can go. You never combine them. So how can you express ability or necessity in the past or in the future? For that, we're going to be checking something called semi-modal verbs. Semi-modal verbs are very similar to modal verbs, but they have some differences. We're going to check them, and well, we're going to check them. We can use them only in some situations. We're going to be explaining that. Okay, so we're going to be talking about modal verbs. We're going to be talking about how do we use them, if they mean possibility, necessity, capacity, preferability, etc. We're going to be speaking about that, and we're going to be speaking about semi-modal verbs. So let's do that. Okay, so let's start. We're going to divide it into a number of classes because, again, this is a big topic. This is a long topic, and it's probably going to take 4 to 5 videos to check all of it. I wouldn't want to explain everything in one video because it will be like a 2 hours video, and I don't think it is a good idea for anyone to be sitting that long in front of the computer. I mean, I think you're gonna get bored. I don't know, you're gonna get confused. So we're gonna start first with modal verbs for permission. Yeah, modal verbs for permission, ability, or capacity. So what is this? Modal verbs for ability, capacity, or permission. We have a few modal verbs that we can use to speak about that. If you want to speak about ability, capacity, or permission, you can use the modal verb can, or in the negative can't, the modal verb could, the modal verb may, or the modal verb might. Okay? If you say I can't run fast, you're saying it is impossible to run fast, or it is not possible for you, or for me in this case. I can't run fast. It is not possible for me to run fast. When you use the modal verb can means ability, capacity, or permission. So when you say I cannot run fast, maybe you say that you don't have the ability to run fast, that you don't have the capacity to run fast, or that you don't have permission to run fast. Maybe you can run fast, but you're in school, and in the school they forbid you to run fast, so you say I can't run fast. I mean, it's just a prohibition that I have. Yeah. Could is very similar to can. You can say the same thing. I could eat now. I could eat now. I have the ability to eat now. I could eat. Do you want to eat something? Yes, I could. When? Now. This is in the present, and this is also in the present. Okay? They are in the present. So when can you run? Now. Well, when can't you run? Now. When could you eat? Now. May I come in? Especially these two, may and might, they are more mostly utilized to speak about permission. They are very formal, and you use them to speak, to ask for permission. When you have your teacher in the school or whatever, she asked you to ask for permission, and she told you, when you want to go to the bathroom, use, may I go to the bathroom? May I come in? You are asking a question, and they are, do I have your permission to enter? This is normally for questions in a polite form, in a very educated and a well-behaved form. Okay, may I come in? We might go. Okay, it is possible that we go. Again, these two are more commonly used for permission, and these two, they can mean ability, capacity, or permission. Yeah. So notice how the modal verb is always taking the place of the auxiliary. You have subject, modal verb, verb in the base form, and sometimes you have your complement. Yes. So you have Again, let's just mark it so that it is clear. We have subject, subject, subject. In this case, this is a question, so you switch positions, and your verbs are always in the base form. Run, eat, come in. This is a phrasal verb. Go, and then when you have a complement, well, this is your complement. But the important thing here to remember also is that all of them, they mean present. Present, 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 and present. May I come in? When? Now, in this moment. May I come in? Yes, you may, or no, you may not, but it's now, in this moment. I can run fast. When? Now. I could eat now. Well, I could eat. When? Now. It is always now. All of them, they always mean present. So how do you change this if you want to express ability, capacity, or permission in the future or in the past? That would be a problem. First, when we are using modal verbs, we can never use auxiliaries, okay? So you never, ever, ever combine them. You can never combine them. You can never, again, you can never say don't and can. You never say do and could. This is an auxiliary. This is a modal verb, and you don't have space for both of them. If you want to make a negative, I can't run fast. If you want to make a question, could I come in? Yeah, but you never combine them. Sentences with modal verbs are not in the present, past, or the future because they never use the auxiliary. But in this case, they are all in the present. So how do you, again, how do you convey, how do you communicate the idea of ability or capacity or permission in the future or in the past? How can you do that? Well, if you want to do it in the past, there is one way. There is one way with the verb, with the modal verb. Sorry, I think I need this. With the modal verb could, maybe you can do it in the past. You can say, I could ride my bike all day. Yep. You have your subject. You have your modal verb, could. You have your verb in the base form, ride, and then you have your complement, my bike all day. Okay, this is a sentence. This is perfect. Now this is in the present. Whenever you say this, I could ride my bike, all of this, it is always in the present. How do you change could so that it means past? When you have a time marker. I could ride my bike when I was a kid. When I was a kid. In this case, you have a different sentence, when I was a kid, a different subject, a different verb, and this is in the past. Because this sentence is in the past, yep, this sentence is in the past, that means that this part is also in the past. So because of the context, you can say that could is in the past. I could ride my bike when I was a kid. Or when I was a kid, I could ride my bike. Cuando era niño, podía andar en mi bicicleta. ¿Sí? Si lo tenemos sin ninguna referencia de tiempo, esto sería como podría. Yo podría andar en bicicleta. ¿Cuándo? Ahora. Si tenemos una referencia de tiempo, este ya no se traduce como podía, perdón, como podría, sino como podía. Pero es el único y tiene cierta flexibilidad. A fuerzas necesitamos acá poner un pedazo que explique cuándo. Pero ¿qué pasa con el futuro y con los otros modales? ¿Cómo puedo hacerlos en pasado o en futuro? It is impossible. You can never use can in the future. You never say, I will can. Nunca dices, yo podré o yo voy a poder. Pero se tiene que poder expresar esa idea, ¿no? ¿Qué tal que yo no puedo, pero mañana voy a poder? ¿Cómo digo eso? Bueno, si quieren decir algo así, no van a poder usar ninguno de estos modales. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Lo que tenemos que hacer es, bueno, aquí tenemos lo mismo. Otra vez, están en presente, pero no usan ni do ni does. Could puede significar pasado, pero solo cuando tienes un solo cuando tiene un marcador de tiempo, una manera de explicar cuándo. Y para expresar futuro, por ejemplo, nunca puedes decir I will can run, I did can run. Esto no se puede. Si ustedes quieren explicar permiso, habilidad o pasado en el futuro o en el pasado, vamos a necesitar semimodales. What is a semi-modal verb? Okay, it says, to understand this part, we need to go back and remember that modal verbs for ability, capacity, permission, obligation, necessity, and future can be changed with perfect or continuous modals. Okay, forget this. Todos estos no se pueden cambiar. Ni los de permiso, ni los de habilidad, ni los de capacidad, ni los de obligación, ni los de necesidad. Esos se quedan como están. Can está en presente y no hay nada que hacerle. ¿Sí? Para poder comunicar estas ideas en el futuro o en el pasado, vamos a necesitar una cosa que se llama semimodales, verbos semimodales. Como el nombre lo sugiere, los semimodales son similares a los modales. Comparten algunas características y reglas, pero no todas ellas. ¿Qué es un semimodal? ¿Cómo funciona? Ok. Aquí tenemos los semimodales para habilidad, capacidad o permiso. ¿Sí? Esto es lo que ustedes van a necesitar cuando estén utilizando semimodales de capacidad o de permiso. ¿Sí? So, ¿cómo le hacemos? Bueno, if I want to express ability or capacity, but I want to express them in the future, or I want to express them in the past, I cannot do that. The only way to do that is to use the semi-modal verb be able to, or be allowed to. These are the modal verbs, the semi-modal verbs that I can use when I want to speak about ability, capacity, or necessity. Ability, capacity, or permission in the simple present. In the past or in the future. So how do you use them? How are they similar and how are they different? I can say, I can jump high. Okay, again, I have my subject, perfect. I have my modal verb. We don't have an auxiliary, we are using a modal verb. I have a verb, and I have a complement. Subject, auxiliary, verb, and complement. This is an affirmative statement. How do I make it, how do I use semi-modal verbs? Semi-modal verbs are very similar because you're going to say, I be able to jump high, or I be able to, jump high. So again, in these cases, you have your subject, because this is an affirmative statement. Then you have your auxiliary. You don't have an auxiliary, but you have the semi-modal verb be able to. Sorry, I made a mistake. I repeated the same one. It's not be able to. The second one was be allowed to. Be allowed to. This is another semi-modal verb. Be allowed to. This is my semi-modal verb. The verbs, they are very similar because they continue to be in the base form. Base form and base form. You don't have to conjugate them. And well, we have the same, it is the same sentence, so it has the same complement. So how are they different and how are they similar? How are modal verbs and semi-modal verbs different and how are they similar? How are they similar? Number one, because you have subject, you have, let me change the color again. You have your subject, your modal verb, your verb in base form, and your complement. So they are very similar because they are in the second position after the subject but before the verb, and they use the verb in the base form. This is something they have in common. Modal verbs like this and semi-modal verbs like this, both of them they go between the subject and the verb, and both of them, they have a verb in the base form. So they are very, very similar this way. ¿En qué otra cosa se parecen? They are very similar in the fact that they are speaking about ability, possibility, or permission. Okay? You're speaking about ability, possibility, or permission. When you're using can, it means ability, possibility, or permission. When you're using be able to or be allowed to, you're speaking about ability, possibility, or permission. What is the difference between be able to and be allowed to? Be able to, it means to be, it means capacity. For example, you can say, I can smoke. When you say I can smoke, it means that you have the ability to smoke. What do you need to smoke? Well, you need your mouth, you need a cigarette, and you need like a lighter or matches, you need fire, and that's it. If you say I can smoke, it's because you have the ability to smoke. In the classroom, normally, for example, in the university, you can't smoke. I can't smoke. I can smoke in the classroom. When you're saying I can smoke in the classroom, it doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to smoke in the classroom. It means that you don't have permission to smoke in the classroom. Can mean ability or can mean permission. Yeah, when you say I can smoke, maybe it means that you have permission to smoke, or maybe it means that you have the ability or the capacity to smoke. When you say I can't smoke, maybe it is that you don't have the ability, maybe you don't know how, or maybe that you don't have permission to do it. For example, in the classroom, technically you can smoke. I mean, you have the ability, but you can't because you don't have permission. That is the difference between be able to and be allowed to. When you say be able to, we are speaking about capacity or ability. I'm able to smoke, it means I can because I have what I need. I have the ability or I have the capacity. When you're using be allowed to, it means permission. Yeah, it means permission. If you say I'm not allowed to smoke, it means it doesn't have anything to do with your ability or your capacity. It has to do with the permission. You don't have it. You don't have express permission from someone. Okay, you will need permission. So hasta aquí son muy parecidos. ¿Por qué? Porque van sujeto, modal o semimodal, verbo en forma base y complemento. Los modales o los semimodales significan, pues, están expresando habilidad, capacidad, permiso. En este caso, pues, podría ser cualquiera de ellos. Ahora, ¿en qué son diferentes? Tienen una diferencia muy, muy importante. La diferencia más importante que tenemos es que estos modales de aquí, estos semimodales de aquí, be able to y be allowed to, estos sí están en presente, en pasado o en futuro. Y eso quiere decir que tenemos que conjugarlos. Acuérdense que can siempre es can, no está en presente, entonces nunca es he cans, nunca es nada parecido. Pero be able to sí se tiene que conjugar. Este verbo to be es súper importante porque nunca se usa así como lo tenemos aquí. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Si queremos que esté en presente, tenemos que conjugarlo en presente. ¿Y cómo lo conjugamos en presente? Bueno, el verbo to be en presente para la primera persona, I am. El verbo to be en presente para la primera persona, I am. Si fuera la segunda, you are. Si fuera la tercera, he is. I am able to jump high. She is allowed to jump high. ¿Más o menos? I am able to. El problema es que como estos están en presente, siguen las reglas del presente. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos una pregunta? Normalmente el modal cambia su lugar con el sujeto. En este caso, este no es un modal, es un semimodal y está en presente. En el presente, el verbo to be es el único que cambia su lugar con el sujeto. Am I able to jump high? ¿Sí? Am I allowed to jump high? ¿Cómo le hacemos para hacer un negativo? Normalmente, pues, el modal se lleva nada más I can't. Aquí, solamente esta parte es la que se va a llevar I am not allowed to jump high. No tengo permitido saltar alto. Es más fácil usar el modal. El modal se cambia nada más, se le pone el negativo nada más. y nunca se conjuga. El problema con los semimodales es que sí se tienen que conjugar. Hay que conjugarlos a la persona. Si están en presente, pues están en presente. Si hacemos un cambio para hacer una pregunta, pues funciona en el presente. Solo el verbo to be es el que cambia, no todo lo demás. Y si queremos hacer un negativo, pues nada más el verbo to be es el que se lleva el negativo. Am I able to jump high? I am not allowed to jump high. Más o menos. Aquí una parte importante es, bueno, otra vez, able to significa yo puedo. Am I able to jump high? ¿Puedo? Me pregunta si tengo la capacidad de saltar alto. Si allowed to significa más bien permiso. I am not allowed to jump high, no tengo permitido saltar alto. No es de que pueda, de tener capacidad, sino de tener permiso. Ahora, es más difícil usar los semimodales. Es más difícil porque, bueno, ya vimos que hay que conjugarlos y pues todo el relajo. Pero ¿cuál es la parte buena? La parte buena es que como están conjugados en presente, también se pueden conjugar en pasado o en futuro. You can conjugate them in the future or in the past. How? Well, this verb to be can be conjugated in the past or in the future. If I want to conjugate it in the past, the verb to be in the past, I was or were. In this case, I was able to. I was able to jump high. It means in the past, I had the ability to jump high, right? If you want to do it in the future, the verb to be has to be in the future. What is the future of the verb to be? Yes, we don't have a conjugation, so we use will be. I will be allowed to jump high. In the future, right now, I am not allowed. But in the future, I will be allowed to jump high. In the future, I will be able to jump high. ¿Cómo decimos yo podré saltar alto o yo podía saltar alto? No se va a poder hacer con can. Nunca decimos can't, nunca podemos decir will can, pero si tenemos el semimodal, los semimodales sí se pueden conjugar. Este verbo to be puede estar en presente, am, are, or is. Puede estar en pasado, was, or were, o puede incluso estar en futuro. En futuro sería will be. Más o menos. Es un poco extraño, es un poco complicado, pero bueno, aquí tenemos cómo funciona esto, ¿sí? En el presente, in the present, I am able to run. You're using the semi-modal verb to be able to. I am able to run. This part is conjugated to the subject. If you are using it in the present, I am able to. When you have a negative, the verb to be is the one taking the negative. I am not able to. If you're making a question, it's only the verb to be that switches position with the subject. Am I allowed to run? Okay, it's easier to use can, can't, or can I. It's easier to use can. With able to and with allowed to, you have to conjugate the modal verb. In this case, in the present, is much easier to use the simple, the modal verb, to use can. But what happens when you want to use the past? If you want to speak in the past, you never say I can't. You never say I didn't can. You never say I did I can. It is impossible to use can with did. You cannot use an auxiliary and a modal verb at the same time. So what do? You use a semi-modal verb, because the semi-modal verb be able to or be allowed to can be conjugated in the present, I am able to, or in the past, I was able to. Well, this will be different. I think this is a mistake. Let me correct this one. How would you say this in the negative? In the past, I didn't really change it. So in the past, I think it will be I, the verb to be in the past, was, and it takes the negative. I wasn't able to. Okay, I wasn't able to run. In this case, I forgot to change this too. Okay, so again, how will you say this as a question? If you want to make a question, the verb to be in the past for this person was I allowed to run Was I allowed to run? Yes, you were allowed to. No, you weren't allowed to. In the past, you never used can or didn't can. But in the past, you can use be able to, and you can use be allowed to. I was allowed to. I wasn't allowed to. Was I allowed to? This is in the past. In the future, again, you never use I will can, I won't can, will I can. You can never use will and can at the same time. But you can use the semi-modal verb. The future of be able to is will be able to. Yes? Will be allowed to. Yes? Won't be allowed to. Won't, will I be allowed to? I forgot to change this, so let's do this right now. This is in the present. Let's make it in the future, and let's make it in the future. Okay. So how do you make this in the future? To use this semi-modal verb in the future, if you want to make it negative, you say won't be. I won't be able to run. I won't be allowed to run. If you want to make a question, only the will changes positions with the subject. Will I, and then will I be allowed to run? Will I be able to run? In this case, this was able. Will I be able to run? Yeah? So this is the way modal verbs and semi-modal verbs are used. I hope this was helpful. We're gonna leave it right here because I don't want to make it any longer. I don't want to get you confused or anything like that. This is a large topic. I think we're gonna take 4, 5, 6 videos, I think, to cover everything that we have to cover with modal verbs. But to me, it is really important that you understand how they work. Okay, so let's summarize very quickly. Number 1, modal verbs are used instead of auxiliaries. You use subject, modal verb, verb, and complement instead of the auxiliaries. So you never use auxiliaries and modal verbs at the same time. It is impossible to use them at the same time because they are using the same space. Yeah? Okay, that's important. What else? We were saying also that modal verbs, they do what the auxiliary will normally do. So the auxiliary will normally take the negative, and it will normally switch positions with the subject to make questions. If you don't have an auxiliary because you have a modal verb, the modal verb takes the auxiliary. Sorry, the modal verb takes the negative, and the modal verb switches positions with the subject to make a question. It is like that. Also, when you have a modal verb, you never conjugate the modal verb. Is can, is could, is will, is must, but never musts, never musting, never willed, nothing like that. You can never change modal verbs. And finally, modal verbs, they always have the verb in the base form. Yeah, they always have the verb in the base form. What is the point of modal verbs? Well, the point of auxiliaries is to tell you the time. They tell you if you're using the simple present, the simple past, the future perfect continuous. The point of the modal verbs is that they tell you the way. They tell you how. They speak to you about ability, possibility, capacity, permission, necessity, obligation, deduction, preference, etc. So we have many different ways to use them. We're going to be checking the rest of the modal verbs and how to use them. The problem is that modal verbs cannot be combined with auxiliaries. Yeah, and because they cannot be combined with auxiliaries, they are never in present, in the past, or in the future, and you can never change them to present, past, or future. If you want to express some ideas in the present, the past, or the future, you need semi-modal verbs. And these are semi-modal verbs. Semi-modal verbs, well, they respect the rules. They are conjugated in the present, in the past, or in the future, and they need to follow the rules of the present, the past, or the future. So that is the problem. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, any comments, anything that you would like to know, if you want me to elaborate a little bit more in any of these topics, on any of these examples, if you have any examples of your own that you want me to analyze with you, that you want me to check and to tell you the how and the why they work the way they work, please let me know. Just write it down on your notebook, and we're gonna check them out during the interactive Zoom meeting that we will have. and or anyways, you can just send me text, and I will try to respond to as many as I can. Okay, so thank you very much. We're gonna stop here right now, and well, we're gonna continue in the next video with more modal verbs and more semi-modal verbs. Okay, so thank you very much, and well, I'll see you around. Bye.